Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country.
Making things, building things, working with our hands is America's heritage.
Sure, if those hands are bionic arms, then by all means, he's got a point. A glorious return to 1950s industrial might. It really would be great. But this entire premise is based on a foundation of variables that don't just add up. This is economic self-sabotage rooted in the fantasy of a full-blown manufacturing return. In short, the good old days of manufacturing most likely ain't coming back, my friend, and I'll tell you why. The narrative of bringing all manufacturing back often glosses over the fundamental economic shifts. It's a far more complex picture than simply wanting all factories back on US soil because of two very important reasons. The first is the automation roller coaster. Yes, labor costs in the US are higher than in many other developing nations, but fixating solely on wages misses the biggest picture. Even if US wages were magically competitive with, let's say, Vietnam or Mexico, the nature of manufacturing has irrevocably changed. The stark reality is that modern manufacturing is relentlessly efficient and increasingly automated. The US auto industry, for example, saw a 10% increase in robot installations in 1 year. Hyundai's $1.1 billion acquisition of Boston Dynamics underscores this trend. So even if a factory returns, it's bringing robots, not necessarily the thousands of jobs of assembly line workers of yesteryears. While headlines trumpet 287,000 reshored jobs in 2023, this represents less than 2.5% of the 12 plus million manufacturing jobs that America has lost since peak manufacturing employment. The new jobs are fewer, higher skilled, and will most likely be required to maintain these complex machines. This technological imperative means that the equation isn't just US jobs versus foreign labor. It's often US labor versus highly efficient, cost-effective automation anywhere in the world. And even Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick accepts this reality, suggesting the great jobs of the future will involve fixing factory robots.
Apple says it's going to come back and build $500 billion worth of plant and equipment here in America. Do you think it's going to be with 100,000 people like they do in China? No. It's going to be robotics, and it's going to have 10,000 people. But those 10,000 people are going to fix the robots.
And this fundamentally changes the employment equation. A factory that employed 5,000 workers in 1970 might just need 500 today. And those jobs require completely different skills. Second, the unwieldy behemoth of modern trade, long-tailed supply chains. Decades of globalization have woven an incredibly intricate mishmash of global supply chains. Your car, your phone, even your clothes, they are all fusions of components and processes spanning multiple continents, optimized for cost and specialized expertise. Take the automotive sector. Parts often cross international borders between the US, Canada, and Mexico multiple times before a vehicle is fully assembled. To onshore this entire ecosystem is a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year undertaking. Even smaller scale supply chain restructuring, as seen in Canada's adaptation to US tariffs, typically requires 6 to 12 months and involves significant price volatility and shortages. Scaling this to the entire US economy, the logistical and financial hurdles are just staggering. The tariff trap, a masterclass in economic self-harm. A cornerstone of the Bring Jobs Back strategy is the imposition of tariffs, designed to make imports more expensive and domestic goods more attractive. However, data from recent trade disputes paint a very different picture, one where tariffs act as a hidden tax on domestic consumers and businesses, often triggering a cascade of negative consequences. Make no mistake, the real payer of tariffs is you, the American consumer, and the American business. Americans say they want manufacturing back, but their wallets tell a very different story. Despite polling showing support for Made in USA, consumer behavior reveals a persistent preference for lower prices. When faced with a 20 to 30% price premium for American-made goods, most consumers would likely choose a cheaper import. Economic studies of the 2018-2019 US-China trade war were clear. US importers and subsequently American consumers and businesses bore nearly 100% of the tariff costs, not Chinese exporters. These tariffs were found to have reduced US manufacturing employment by 1.4% and raised producer prices by about 4.1%. So let's think about it. If you had to pay $1,500 more for your next smartphone, $10,000 more for your next car, and maybe 25% more for all your children's clothes, all to support American manufacturing, would you do it? Now, do this 30% hike for every item you touch at a store while your income remains exactly the same. Would you still do it? Or would you choose the cheaper import? I think it creates a fundamental disconnect between stated values and actual purchasing decisions that even patriotic marketing will find really hard to overcome. So just think about that, and if you disagree with me, I'm happy to learn and stand corrected. Interestingly, game theory predicts the pain. Particularly, concepts like prisoner's dilemma explains why nations often engage in mutually destructive trade wars. Each country acting in what it perceives as its short-term self-interest by imposing tariffs contributes to a worse collective outcome where global trade shrinks and costs rise for everybody. I did a video on this which you can check out here. The talk of winning a trade war often ignores the fundamental economic principle that trade is generally a positive-sum game. China's response to US tariffs with its own, often calibrated tariffs, like a 125% response to the US's 145% tariff in one scenario, is a textbook tit-for-tat move, signaling resolve but also acknowledging the potential of a devastating escalation spiral. So, if the dream of mass, low-skilled manufacturing return is a data-refuted illusion, what does a realistic American manufacturing future look like? I think it's about being smart, strategic, and specialized, and it will benefit from a three-point framework. First, focus where reshoring makes sense. There's a strong case for bolstering domestic manufacturing in sectors critical to national security, public health, and technological leadership, amongst others. Think semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, defense technologies, and advanced materials. The CHIPS Act, for example, aims to incentivize domestic semiconductor production. However, these are typically capital-intensive and not labor-intensive industries. A multi-billion-dollar semiconductor fabrication plant might employ a few thousand engineers and technicians, highly skilled people, and not the tens of thousands seen in the mid-20th century auto plants. The goal here is resilience and technology sovereignty, not mass employment in the traditional sense. Second, double down on the automation mandate. Any manufacturing that does return or expands to the US will, by necessity, be heavily automated to remain globally competitive. As seen in Canada, tariff pressures can ironically accelerate the adoption of productivity-enhancing technologies and automation as companies strive to offset higher input costs. This means fewer workers per unit of output, fundamentally altering the employment landscape. The great jobs of the future in manufacturing, as even the proponents of reshoring acknowledge, will increasingly involve designing, programming, and maintaining these sophisticated automated systems. Number 3, if you really want to be good at manufacturing, bridge the true manufacturing skills chasm. The skills required for modern, automated manufacturing are vastly different from those of the past. There's a significant gap between the existing general and wider workforce's skills and the demands of advanced manufacturing roles, which require expertise in robotics, AI, data analytics, and precision engineering. While retraining initiatives are crucial, bridging the chasm is a long-term challenge that can't be solved by simply wishing factories were to return back into existence in the way they used to be. The uncomfortable truth that consumers and workers must confront. Are you ready to pay the Made in USA super premium for every purchase across the board? The rhetoric of reshoring often sidesteps the direct impact on American households and the evolving nature of work. Just look at Canada. The Buy Canadian movement gained traction due to consumer patriotism and reaction to US policies. But this was often for specific categories of American-made goods and didn't necessarily involve absorbing massive price hikes across the board. Yes, the US consumer spends a lot, but you have also demonstrated a very strong preference for value. Also, jobs of the past, unfortunately, are not jobs of the future. The promise of bringing back good manufacturing jobs often evokes this image of a stable, well-paying assembly line work accessible with a high school diploma. I am sorry, but that era is largely over. The manufacturing jobs of the 21st century demand continuous learning, adaptability, and technical proficiency. Workers must be prepared for a landscape where job security is tied to evolving skills and not just seniority. Just look at the dark factories people are talking about that are propping up everywhere in China. How long do you think that US businesses will keep people employed out of patriotism when the rest of the world is producing the same product at a price point that is 30, 50, or even 70% lower? Economics has a way of winning whether we like it or not. Geopolitical realities, a multipolar manufacturing world. The narrative that manufacturing can simply be reclaimed from countries like China ignores the dynamic and competitive global landscape. Even if companies seek to de-risk their supply chains and reduce over-reliance on single countries, they aren't automatically flocking to the US. They are diversifying to other competitive regions. Vietnam, India, Mexico, Eastern Europe, the list goes on. Each of these locations offers its own set of advantages in terms of labor costs, regulatory environments, proximity, clustering, and market access. Canada, for example, under pressure from US trade policies, accelerated efforts to diversify its trade relationships with the EU, UK, and Asian markets through agreements like the CETA and CPTPP. Expecting the world to fall into your arms just because Trump so wishes is a dangerous ploy. And if anything, it'll make the world find ways to cut the US out of the picture. The US must compete on merit and not assume it is the default alternative. If anything, game theory suggests that the current extreme tariff levels between the US and China are unsustainable and represent a regime change in the relationship rather than a temporary spat. A complete decoupling is improbable in the near to midterm given the deep economic intertwining. However, a return to the pre-2025 low tariff relations is also unlikely. The most probable outcome is a new equilibrium with tariffs setting in the range of 25 to 40%, high enough to reshape strategic supply chains like technology, but not so high so as to collapse all trade. China's stated goal of self-sufficiency and fostering a multipolar world further complicates any simplistic notion of the US simply taking back industries. It's just not going to happen. At the expense of repeating myself, I am going to say this once more. The emotional appeal of bringing all manufacturing back is potent, and all power to you, President Trump, and everyone else aspiring for that, if you can make that happen. But the data, the economic realities, and the lessons from recent trade conflicts paint a starkly different picture. A full, nostalgic return to mid-20th century style mass manufacturing is not only practically impossible due to automation, global supply chains, and prohibitive costs, but the pursuit of it through aggressive trade policies is damaging to the US economy, the dollar, and the Treasury's safe haven status. The path to a strong American manufacturing future lies in a future that includes a few different things. A strategic focus to prioritize investment in high value, high quality, automated manufacturing in sectors critical for national and economic security. Building skills to foster a world-class ecosystem for innovation and develop a workforce equipped with the advanced skills needed for tomorrow's industries. And smart trade practices to engage in fair and strategic trade that recognizes global interdependencies rather than resorting to self-defeating protectionism that harms both consumers and businesses alike. The choice is between clinging to an outdated, data-deficient dream versus building a pragmatic, competitive, and sustainable manufacturing sector fit for the 21st century? The data is clear. The question is, are Americans ready to listen? What's your take on the future of American manufacturing? Can the desire for domestic production be reconciled with the global economic realities that we face today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this analysis interesting, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one, and have a great day.